Procedures Guide. I consider this to be one of the more important ones. Module Objectives. After completing this module, you should be able to explain the purpose of the Operation and Procedures Guide, determine what information to capture in the Operation and Procedures Guide, complete the Operation and Procedures Guide, and then why you will need to know documenting the administration, operation, and use-related tasks that enable the customer to transition the solution into business-as-usual operation and acceptance of the solution. Successful deployment and adoption of the solution depends on this transition. Now we'll take a look at the purpose of the Operation and Procedures Guide. The purpose of the Operation and Procedures Guide is to provide the reader with a concise overview on key elements that are required to run the deployed operational solution, including but not limited to backup, restore, high availability, and failover procedures. There's much to this. It also captures how the customer administers, operates, and uses the solution. It aids in the adoption of the solution. The guide also contains key how-to elements relating to system administration, user management, security configurations, as well as automated task and system logging configurations. This document typically resonates with the staff in the run environment as it contains all pertinent information about the procedures necessary to operate the solution, and it also aids in triage and troubleshooting activity. The creation of the document is a collaboration, a very collaborative effort between the customer and CA Services. It cannot be done in a silo. Now we'll take a look at the inputs into what it takes to put the Operation and Procedures document together. The technical design document, along with the build and integration document, are inputs for the creation of the Operations and Procedures Guide. This document describes in detail the steps that are taken to deploy the solution in a customer's environment. It also contains thorough installation, configuration, and installation instructions. It can contain screenshots. However, if the information already exists in the other documents along with the product documentation, a reference to those inputs is all that is necessary. I believe that this document is most likely one of the most important ones, as the customer typically uses it as a reference guide, along with future consultants and the support staff to sustain the solution. The Operation and Procedures Guide must be modified by the solution architect and the consultants to reflect the as-built state of the solution. This document is used for all projects regardless of size. Again, the creation of the Operation and Procedures Guide is mandatory for all services delivery engagements. The Technical Design Guide provides recommendations and guidance for a vast majority of content in the build-in integration document. Both of these documents are leveraged to create the Operations and Procedures Guide. This document essentially houses the care and feeding information about the solution, including startup and shutdown procedures, backup requirements, risk mitigation information, monitoring and reporting information, process information, information about security controls, along with troubleshooting and triage information, and a vast amount of detail on each of these topics. Okay, next we're going to take a look at what the document should actually contain. Let's take a look at what it takes to put a proper Operation and Procedures Guide together, now that we understand the purpose of the document. The solution operating environment, the solution operations environment must reflect the production as built configuration, including integrations and any other customer specific component. We also need to provide
unconstitutional. That's what the president and CEO of the Associated Press called the government's secret seizure last year of 2 months of AP journalists' phone records.
We don't question their right to conduct these sort of investigations. We just think they went about it the wrong way. So sweeping, so secretively, so abusively and harassingly, and
without taking into consideration the startup sequence that is necessary for dependencies on Embedded Entitlements Manager or any other subordinate components. This results in a service outage that well could be avoided by proper sequencing. So this must be captured in the document. Backup requirements. VMware snapshots are not a replacement for backup and restore. One still needs to schedule appropriate backups and verify the backups are valid. Don't forget about the open files and the online databases in the backups, and make sure you have the proper agents to do those open files and those live database backups. Media rotation and archival are still required, and we need to validate those also. All this needs to be captured in the document, along with monitoring and reporting. The solution must have the appropriate instrumentation stack by leveraging the appropriate agent, or RFC 2790, the specialized application and network monitoring tools to monitor processes, scrape logs, measure end-user response, and ultimately end-to-end application performance. Reporting matrices should be defined early on, and the appropriate reports defined and scheduled during non-peak production loads. All this and the procedures for all of this need to be captured in the Operation and Procedures Guide. Backup windows should be avoided when we're running the reports. All procedures for configuring, monitoring, and reporting should be reflected in the Operation and Procedures Guide. Don't forget about the windows of maintenance. When the systems may not be available, this should also be captured. Processes. Anything to do with administrative, user, and operations processes should be captured and documented. Security control information that is related to securing the solution, monitoring for security breaches, and the appropriate security violation reporting should also be captured. Look at this from an auditor's perspective. Document where the information is and how it may be viewed, along with information about each of the security controls that are in place within the solution. As far as the troubleshooting guide and the triage information, the location of appropriate logs, system logs, common troubleshooting and triage procedures should also be captured and documented in this guide, along with any other supporting documentation. References are fine as long as all the documentation is available. Online support self-help information, along with support's phone numbers and related URL information about each of the specific products and integration should also be included. Again, this document, when completed properly, is most likely one of the most important documents we leave with the customer, as it adds tremendous value. Next, let's take a look at what to consider when putting together a proper Operation and Procedures Guide. The importance of the Operation and Procedures Guide cannot be overstated. This guide provides startup and shutdown procedures, along with backup and recovery procedures, risk mitigation information, the monitoring instrumentation configuration stack, reporting matrix and scheduling information, anything to do with admin, operations, and user-related processes, and the information about security configuration and security controls that are in place, and the how-to for everything that I've just referenced. It is also important to re-emphasize that this is a collaborative effort, and this guide is put together by both CA and the customer, although CA is on the hook to ensure that the customer fully understands the operation and procedures that are necessary to sustain the solution. Following that, the customer takes ownership of the document and updates it as necessary. For a custom solution, the author will start with a blank template. All the sections will need to be completed. Each template provides red-line guidance, the instructions and the directions that help the author to understand how to complete each of the sections based upon the deliverable being created and the context of that deliverable. The author will need to work collaboratively with the customer to ensure that they fully understand the operation and procedural recommendations for the solution, and ensure that the customer takes ownership and provides input to the document to describe how they will address the recommendations that CA is providing. The document will also be updated, and all relevant sections in the document that have changed will be updated. Section 1, the documentation of the solution operation environment. This section is not intended to describe the deployed environment in detail, because this has already been done in the context of the TDS and the BNI guides. The intent of this section is to call out any aspect of the solution that is non-standard, anything to do with non-standard configuration, integration of third-party, or customer systems that touch the solution
document.
or interface
Well,
with
this
the
is only
solution.
used internally
This
to
would
CA
include
and is not a
the
customer
administrators or the
deliverable.
operators
It is a
need to
very
be aware
important
of
aspect
in
of
the
our
use of
services
the
business.
solution. On section 1.1,
First,
the current
let's take a look at the
environment,
object.
there's really no need to describe in detail the current solution environment, as it's already been deployed and documented in the TDS. And there's no context between the sections 1.1 and the following
Completing
sections.
this module, you should be able to explain the purpose of the test plan, determine the information that should be captured within it,
If the
how to
network
complete the
context has
document,
not been
and what
documented elsewhere, then this is where you capture that information. And then 1.1.2, the server model. If the server model hasn't been documented elsewhere, then you use this section to document the relationship between the in-scope
solution
servers
stack
that are
artifacts
deployed
and the
within
customer
boundaries of the
deliverables in it.
solution, as well as any dependency with those servers, and provide additional information about each regarding the name, the IP address, the open ports on the node, both UDP and TCP, and provide additional details in the appropriate section, which is 1.2.4. Anything to do with the operating system level and the patches, the amount of memory, the amount of file system, the number of drives, how they're configured, the applications that are running on that node, all, not just the solution-specific components, because there may be conflicts or interdependencies that we need to call out. The location of the system, it's often, the virtual images are very hard to locate. Make sure you put some type of a reference to be able to identify those. As you build the document, don't forget to get rid of the directions, the instructions, before you hand it over to the customer. Moving on to the data model in 1.1.3. The purpose of any IT solution is to provide appropriate access to the information for the requesting user. All access controls and access methods should be in place to properly care for the information stored in the data repositories of the solution. The data model should reflect the relationship of the data stores to the servers, the applications, and the network. And the data model should contain the user interfaces, access methods, inputs and outputs, the database schema, security controls, backup procedures, and business continuity plans. Moving forward to the data flow diagrams, if the data flow model is not documented elsewhere, then a graphical depiction might be represented in this section. Data flow diagrams should support the use cases of the solution. Data flows are pipelines through which packets of information flow by a process to and from data stores. When applicable, also document external entities, the data stores that support the solution. Database schema. If the database schema has not been documented elsewhere, then you would use this section of the document for those data elements of the information that stores information for the solution. Either a relational database, an LDAP store, or a flat file. Tables and attributes and schema document information, dependencies within the solution, as well as data feeds and data outputs. This could include reports, CSV files, LDIF, dumps, anything along these lines. Moving forward to the external application or system dependencies. If the external application or system dependencies have not been documented elsewhere, then you'd use this section to identify any external application or system dependencies the deployed solution utilizes in production. And it might include any of the following. The authoritative source of data feeds, or the location of the database servers, information about those, network and server monitoring systems, reporting systems, web servers, web application servers, application gateways, middleware, just to mention a few. Moving forward to section 1.2, configuration. The key to deploying a solution in accordance with agreed upon requirements is to properly configure all of the moving parts. Configuration and documentation of that configuration is paramount. As the deployment stages are finished, each of the configuration portions of the solution should be clearly documented for ongoing care and maintenance. Some solutions are more parameter-driven than others. However, more often the environments in which the solution resides provide substantial configuration capabilities that dictate the behavior of the solution, and as such, this should be documented. Key parameters. Identify key parameters that are used by any portion of the deployed solution. Section 1.2.2, move or add additional servers considerations. When moving a system that supports the deployed solution, identify any specific considerations that must be taken into account to facilitate minimal disruption of production service availability and end-user impact. Sometimes it is required to add additional servers to the solution to address growing and scalability issues, or segregation of the organization. In order to take advantage of the proper hardware, identify each of the following: proper operating system requirements and patch levels, application solution installation and configuration, data store migration and replication, security requirements such as identities, access rules, network connectivity and port usage configuration, and access methods. Procedures for software upgrades. Identify the procedures that are used to upgrade the solution's software by component. Also, if an operating system upgrade or patch can affect the operation of the solution, then you need to provide adequate documentation along with what it takes to do the proper testing prior to deploying the changes in production. You need to describe the delivery method of the software upgrade, whether it be manual or through an automated software delivery system. Describe the controls that are in place to back out or restore the solution to a normal operating environment prior to the upgrade. The ports that are used in section 1.2.4. The purpose of this section is to document the ports that are used by each of the systems that make up the solution, that support the solution. This only needs to be documented in this guide if they have not been captured elsewhere. Certificates describe in detail any and all digital certificates used in this solution. Management tools that are used for certificate generation and details about those should also be provided. Anything to do with revocation procedures or certificate distribution methods should also be documented. If applicable, identify the certificate authority that is issuing the digital certificate and any procedure specific to the solution regarding certificates in this section. Customer-specific components on 1.3. This is any additional pieces that interface with the solution that need to be documented for specific purposes that support the solution. This could be additional agents, connectors, user interface enhancements, data feed modules, customer-specific reports. The most critical part to document here is the location of the source code and the appropriate IP ownership and identifying the responsible party for the maintenance of the code. Okay, that pretty much covers section 1. We're going to pick it up a bit in the rest of the sections. With that, we'll move into section 2. Okay, what needs to go into section 2? First off, the startup and shutdown procedures. We need to identify the proper steps to start up the deployed solution and the sequencing covering the necessary steps to start from a completely shut down system. The key here is to identify the proper sequence and the interdependencies of the solution. Although some solutions may start automatically, it is suggested that you identify each and every step necessary for the solution to come up cleanly and completely. An example of sequencing and interdependency might be the Embedded Entitlements Manager, because this is a shared component and it must be available before any of the other components of the solutions are started. The Operations Insight Connector servers cannot be started until Spectrum Infrastructure Management Distributed Spectro servers are available, or they may fail to connect. The sequence for starting Service Operations Insight is as follows, as far as an example: the database, the application server, the web server, and then the connectors. And again, any of the dependencies must be captured. Furthermore, you should document a set of steps to validate the proper working conditions once the solution has started correctly. Okay, as far as prerequisites, you capture those in section 2.11. You need to identify all necessary prerequisites the solution needs prior to a proper startup procedure. Other than operating system, the solution may need the database to be started, or a web server or web application server to be running. This information needs to be captured. External dependencies. Although the solution may start up properly, it may depend on other applications or systems being available for the solution to work properly. These dependencies, including anything to do with external data stores, data feeds, solution monitoring, and security controls, would need to be captured in this section. As far as shutdown procedures and sequence, we need to also document the proper shutdown procedures for all the components of the solution without jeopardizing any data integrity. In some cases, some manual procedures must be performed to verify all active users of the solution are disconnected from the system. This will facilitate data transaction integrity. And we won't have a problem quiescing the application with the proper sequencing. It may also be important to document the short version of these procedures in an event of a system outage or an emergency. In that case, you should document the data integrity validation steps necessary to validate the solution after it is back up and running. Backup requirements need to be captured in section 3. We really anticipate that this section of the document will link or contain the information provided by the customer, such as the individual that is completing this document must consult directly with the customer to ensure that the information contained is accurate. The technical design document provides details of the components and the frequency of the backups that needs to be agreed upon with the customer. This information does not need to be repeated in this information. Simply refer to the TDS for this. Backup procedures are captured in section 3.1. Backup prerequisite tasks are captured in section 3.2. Backup post-completion tasks are captured in section 3.3. Storage location for the backups is in section 3.4. You capture the backup media rotation information in section 3.5, and anything to do with log file archival and backup. And this is something that cannot be overlooked. We capture this information in section 3.6. In Section 4, it's anticipated that we'll link or information that is provided by the customer for risk mitigation. And we would also expect that the technical design document will provide details about how failover and high availability are going to be covered in the solution. So, not only high availability and failover, but this could actually get into disaster recovery. So anything to do with the escalation procedures during a system outage would be documented in Section 4.1. Anything to do with the failover, on the stand-in of the solution would be 4.2, and anything to do with disaster recovery or business continuity, as it's more commonly known today, would be captured in 4.3. Section 5. This is where anything that for monitoring regarding the instrumentation stack of the solution and anything to do with reporting as far as the report types, the frequency, and the distribution is captured. So in 5.1, this is where we capture the critical processes, the daemons, the started task, the services of the deployed solution. That they should already be captured in the technical design document, and if to where we need to get into additional detail, we put that information here. Use this section to describe the proper procedures to execute once the monitored processes are down, as far as quiescing the system and what it would take to restart them automatically should an escalation occur. And the log scrapes. This goes, for monitoring the system logs, the application logs, and the database logs, the location of those logs. This information is extremely useful for triage and troubleshooting also. Then we get into the ports section. Again, a lot of this information should be available in the technical design document, but use this section to describe the method that is necessary for monitoring the solution and anything to do with monitoring requirements and controls around the ports. Reporting in Section 5.4. Most solutions have reporting requirements, not only internal application or business reporting, but also external auditing reports. Document the different reports that are necessary to support the solution, the frequency, and their distribution. In 5.4.1, this is where the specific report types, report by the types by name, if they are automatic or manual, ad hoc or static, as well as any external systems reports that are required. Frequency for each of the report runs, whether they're automated, whether they're kicked off manually, and if they are manually executed, describe the procedures about how to harvest the data and produce the report. And that's captured in 5.4.2. 5.4.3 as far as distribution, if it's automatic, if it's going out, in email. Some reports are highly confidential, such as financial data, personnel information, or government classified information. So you would need to provide proper instructions for handling, distribution, and disposal of those reports, and it has to be clearly articulated in this section. As we move into the processes section and document those in Section 6, 6.1, this is where we're going to describe the administrative processes that the solution administrators need to use in order to properly maintain and interact with the solution that we've deployed. Describe how the solution administrators grant access to end users, produce reports, and interact with the operations group. User processes describe, basically the examples of procedures regarding to logging on and logging off, the various UIs, desktop client interactions, system or solution access, the request procedures, input and output information, and handling, and the security controls. And that's captured in 6.2, 6.3, operations processes. This is where we take the information required for proper care and maintenance of the deployed solution, list the processes that are required outside of the normal startup and shutdown, backup, and general maintenance that are described in other parts of the document, and a little bit more detail around what we've already captured in the TDS around operational processes. Section 7 in the document is where we take and put a touch on anything to do with security controls, what's required regarding securing the solution, identifying the controls that are necessary to secure the solution. If the solution has internal security controls, document the usage definitions and access methods for those controls. And when external security controls are utilized, identify the components that need to be secured and how, user access methods along with their security controls, physical security requirements of the systems and servers, and the protocols and ports that are used. If this is recorded by CA or the customer elsewhere, then you can reference that documentation. Because it's potentially already documented in the technical design or the B&I guide. Section 7.2, securing security monitoring. Describe the security monitoring requirements of the deployed solution and document the manual or the system-enabled security controls. Identify the log files and the messages that need to be monitored, and you do that with the instrumentation stack. Identify the written policies that govern the security of the solution. If this is recorded, elsewhere, then just reference those documents as it relates to security monitoring in this section. 7.3, security violation reporting. Once a security violation has occurred, based on established written or system policies, describe the escalation or reporting requirement to properly document the violation or the intrusion. And again, if this is documented elsewhere, you can refer to it, refer to that documentation in this section, and that'll cover the requirement. Section 8 is one of my favorites, troubleshooting guide. Definitely helpful for troubleshooting and triage when things aren't just quite right. So in Section 8.1, product documentation that's available, refer to the appropriate out-of-the-box product documentation and its location, whether it be on the bookshelf, online, or in some other location. And any other specific solution documentation that might have to do with add-on services or components or customizations. And Xmatters would be a good example of this, as far as what we're driving to. And Section 8.2, Solution Online Self-Help. Some solutions come with online help already. Others require web-based access to the vendor's knowledge base systems. Define the access methods for the end users, administrators, and the operations personnel. Point out where those URLs or that information is clearly identified and captured in this section. Section 8.3, product customer support. When different vendors are used in a part of the deployed solution, documentation, including the contact information, customer account numbers, online phone number procedures that are used to request a customer support for the various vendor products would go in this section. 8.4, internal support procedures as it pertains to the deployed solution. Document the internal support procedures that are used. Describe the escalation methods, trouble ticket usage, automatic or manual, and the resolution groups, as far as the resolver groups that need to be notified. Common troubleshooting and actions, basic troubleshooting actions, in Section 8.5 should be described here. For further information, you can reference the product documentation, point to that, reference that in this section, or any online knowledge database that might be available or should be utilized. Since this is meant to be a living document, updates to this section and all sections within the document can continue to be done as more experience with the solution occurs. It's sort of a tips and tricks, a living document. Let's not forget that and convey that with our customer. So what do you do with a completed deliverable regarding the Operation and Procedures Guide? Well, once the deliverable is completed, it needs to be fully discussed and reviewed with the customer. List who the deliverable needs to be shared with, capture that, provide the recommendations for the deliverable, whether it is to be presented or reviewed. If you use a PowerPoint, reference that, call out the key information in the PowerPoint, and use the deliverable as backup material should the customer wish to discuss a particular aspect in more detail. This module described the purpose of the Operation and Procedures Guide and helped you with determining what types of information needs to be captured and documented in the guide and how to complete the Operation and Procedures Guide. We want to thank you for your time and on to the next module. Thank you.